Welcome to Revolutionary Motion, where we show you tennis from a different perspective. In this video, we'll explain to you the ideal foot positioning on your serve and why this foot positioning is so good. So usually most people keep a foot positioning in their preparation. It's a bit more sideways, right? And then they're trying to rotate their feet, their hips into the court. Now we're going to explain to you why that's not as good as keeping your foot positioning a bit more open and making sure that your left foot points towards the right net post no matter which side you're serving from. So the key point here is where your body has to be positioned when you're hitting the ball. So when we're making contact, obviously our shoulders should be kind of facing forward, our chest should be facing forward, and we should be having a contact point that gets our ball towards the court we're aiming for. So on the do side, our racket obviously has to point towards the left service box, and that's really elemental for us to get the ball inside the court. Now obviously it doesn't really matter what kind of foot positioning we have, we can always make the racket point in that direction. However, the problem is that if we are very sideways and we keep this sideways position, meaning our hips kind of point towards the side fence over here, and now we're making contact like this, you can see how twisted our body actually is. So that tells us that now we're not going to have a lot of flexibility left to play with. So that means our body, because it's already so twisted, has already started to slow down its movement. So that means we're actually losing a lot of power if we're making contact with our hips still facing sideways and our racket pointing towards the court we're aiming for. That's why people start in this position and then rotate into the court. Now the problem with this rotation is that if you're over-rotating or under-rotating by just a little bit, you're losing accuracy. Now the problem is that most people don't serve millions of serves every year, and thus they won't be good enough at controlling that hip rotation so it's spot on every single time. That's why it's not advisable for, recreational players and players up to maybe even 5-0 level to have this type of motion. This hip rotation will not add a whole lot of power, but it will make you lose control unless you're perfectly trained for it. So instead of keeping your feet sideways and pointing them towards the court on your right, you want your feet to point more forward. So in this case, the left foot pointing towards the right net post, as I explained earlier, the right foot keeping a position that makes you feel comfortable. Okay, so you have to keep your balance here. So obviously you could start like this, but as you can see, it's really difficult to find my balance and push forward from here. So I have to make sure that my right foot kind of stays more next to my left foot, kind of in one line here. If we're keeping this position, we can now make contact with the ball very comfortably. You can see that I'm not very twisted when I make contact like that. So that means that at this point, we can still have a lot of power flowing through our racket and into the ball without having to turn our hips in the process. And as you can imagine, that makes it much easier to control the precision and accuracy of your serve every single time. So make sure that you keep your feet pointing a bit more forward, so now we can bend back, swing into the ball, and not have to worry about being too twisted or having to rotate our hips into the court. Now, if you think that this is not going to give you as much power because, you're not as flexible going back this way and you're not going to be able to accelerate as much, think again. If you're in this position, and now let's say you just take the racket up into the trophy position and you don't even bend your knees, obviously from here you don't have a very long swing path to the contact point. But you can bend yourself back, twist yourself, in the opposite way of where you would twist yourself when you're hitting, as far as you want, as far as your body lets you. There's no problem with that, because all this tension that you build up by rotating this way will unravel and undo itself and release into the contact point. So that means if you have your feet pointing more forward and you're actually twisting your shoulders back further without moving your hips this way, you will be able to create even more power than if you're just sideways and getting in a trophy position like this, because you won't have this twist of the upper body against the lower body in your preparation, which then means less force will release into the contact point when you're actually rotating forward and trying to swing. So let me give you a quick example of that. If we're keeping our feet sideways here, And now we're trying to rotate, would look something like this. Okay, and it wouldn't be that hard to get the ball in for me because I've served so many serves, but it's really difficult for somebody that hasn't served as many. If you keep your feet pointing forward, it's much easier to control the direction of your shot. Now let's take a look at the whole thing from a different angle so you can see how my hips have to turn forward when I'm positioned sideways. And now if my hips are already pointed forward because my left foot points at the right net post, the whole thing would look like this.
Hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys soon.